So nice to welcome Hall of Fame tennis player and former world number one Jim Courier to Questions for Cancer Research. Jim, thanks so much for joining us. How are you?
I'm great, Chris. Thanks for the invitation to join you.
Yeah, no, it's great. Just an incredible career. Jim won 23 events, including two Australian Opens, two French Opens. He spent 58 weeks as world number one, and his record for making the finals of all four majors at the young age of 22 years and 10 months still stands today. Jim, I know these days that you keep a really busy schedule, spending quality time with your wife, Susanna, and your two sons, Kellen and Carson. You're running a sports and entertainment business, and you do a fair amount of broadcasting. Can you tell us what broadcast work you're doing these days?
Sure. So I work about 145 days on television each year right now. My US home is with the Tennis Channel. So they've got a studio in Los Angeles. So upcoming, I'll be covering the Madrid Open and the Italian Open, which is in Rome, but I'll be doing it remotely from LA. So we'll go into the studio, we put headphones on, watch screens, and call the matches. And we've been doing that for quite a while, well before COVID. But I also travel to tournaments like Indian Wells and Miami. And I work for international broadcasters at the Australian Open, French Open. So I get around to most of the big tournaments in person, but some of the bigger tournaments that are in Europe that are not majors, I'll do remotely. So it's a fun job. I love it, and I'm lucky to have it.
Yeah, it's great, and I know you've really gotten involved with the Australian Open and doing the on-court interviews. I mean, I'm sure that's been a lot of fun for you.
Yeah, it's fun. That's a job where I work for their local broadcaster that has the rights, and right now it's Channel 9, which would be like an ABC or an NBC equivalent here in America, free to air, and they do have me call the matches, and then if I'm calling that match, they ask me to interview the player on court, which is it's a really cool opportunity to get to spend time with the players. They're in a good mood because they've just won their match. So, and they know they're still performing to the audience when they do the interview, because it goes to the house of, if you're on center court, it's 15,000 people and other courts are 10,000 or 5,000. So they know their answers are reflecting that they're speaking to a broader audience than just one person.
Yeah, no, that's pretty cool that they do that after the events.
Mm.
Jim, in 2004, you founded Inside Out Sports and Entertainment with John Venison. I know that the business owns and operates some sporting events and does a lot more. Can you tell us about your business?
Yeah, so John and I went to Bollottieri's Tennis Academy together when we were kids, so boarding school effectively. So I've known him since I was a teenager. He's a great guy, and we started the business a while ago, and it's morphed over time. We started doing primarily tennis events with a senior tour that we founded and ran called it was initially the Outback Champion Series and the Power Share. We have various sponsors that cycled through. And we also have done things like produce volleyball events, beach volleyball, produce golf events. We've been kind of involved in a few different scenarios, but right now the business is really transitioned mostly into managing pickleball events for Major League Pickleball and padel events. I don't know if you know padel, but it's a paddle, but it's a kind of a Latin American slash European squash meets tennis type sport
Hmm.
that is catching on and has a new league in America called the PPL. So we're producing those events for them and a few other select events in the tennis space where we co-own the Pickleball Slam, which you may have seen on ESPN.
Yeah.
There's like Agassi and Graf playing in it. So there are a few things that we do. John Venison runs the business. I am a silent partner, not operating the way that I once was with him on a day-to-day, but he does a great job, and it's a nice business.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing, right? What's happened with pickleball taking off, I guess, I know in the US, probably worldwide. Does that, I mean, I remember watching, I think that your event was out of Miami. Does that have the potential to really become a big spectator sport? It's so popular.
Well, time will tell. It's certainly a massive participant sport. There are so many people that love playing pickleball because it has a low barrier to entry relative to some other racket sports. Like if you can play table tennis or ping pong, you can kind of translate that type of shot onto the pickleball court and have success because the ball travels slower because it's a wiffle ball, right? So it's easier to control. Um, and it's certainly catching some momentum from a viewing audience standpoint, and we'll see how far that can travel. They're still developing the brands of the top players that are going to carry the sport and become appointment viewing. But it's very nascent at this point, so time will tell.
Right, right. Got it. Jim, you grew up in Central Florida. Your dad was a pitcher for the University of Florida, and you kind of split your time growing up sports-wise between baseball and tennis.
Hmm.
You eventually chose tennis over baseball, and at the prestigious Orange Bowl Junior Tournament, you lost in the finals of the 14 and under division. But things kind of took a big turn there. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, sure. So the Orange Bowl tennis tournament was considered the de facto international junior championships. It happened in December, leading into the Orange Bowl football game, and all the players from around the world would travel there. So when I made the finals of the 14 and unders, I caught the attention of a gentleman named Nick Bollottieri, who was one of the first people to start a sports academy effectively. It's now known as IMG Academy, and it has multi sports, but at the time it was simply a tennis academy in Bradenton, Florida. And I got invited to go join all these great players that were training there on a scholarship, and quickly accepted that. And that was a direct result of making the finals of that Orange Bowl 14 and unders.
Yeah, yeah. Just an amazing place. One of the stories that came out of you going to Bolloteri, and I love it. I think anybody who played sports loves it. I guess it was in 1989 at the French Open, you were playing Andre Agassi, and
Mhm.
I guess Nick kind of showed up to the match, and he sat in Andre's box, player
Mhm.
box, and not yours, or maybe could have been neutral. And I know that had a pretty big effect on you. Tell me a little bit about what went down there.
Yeah, so I had a couple of forks in the road with Nick, who, I wouldn't be sitting here talking to you today without his influence and his generosity. So the first fork we've already talked about, when he offered our family a scholarship to go down there. And keep in mind, this is 1985. It was $25,000 a year to go there. That was and is a lot of money. So that was a huge opportunity for me to go down there and be trained like a professional by professionals. So that set me up for success. When 1989, that match at Roland Garros happened, it felt like a betrayal to me. I mean, Nick, I understood now in hindsight, I understand the business reasons that he was attaching himself to Andre. Very marketable figure, super talented. We can look at Andre's career and understand why Nick would make that choice, right? It was good for his business to be seen with Andre. Would have probably been better, and he acknowledged this later, that would have been better to sit in a neutral corner and take credit for everybody,
Yeah,
which
sure.
he deserved. But he didn't, and that led me to leave his underneath his wings effectively and go out on my own. And it pushed me into a direction that was probably needed at that point anyway, to just hear some different voices and try and improve my game in different ways. So it was a blessing in the end that it happened. It was painful in the moment. It's one of those moments that, at 19, or I think I was 18 years old, I was too young and too immature to really understand the big picture. I was only seeing it in my lane, which was a very narrow lens. So I look back on it now and I appreciate what it did for my career, and wish I could have handled it with a little more grace at the time. But an 18-year-old in a highly emotional state is not going to always make the most, rational. Even though it was a good decision, I think I probably could have made it a little more cold-bloodedly.
Yeah, I mean, look, that was tough. I mean, you're 18 years old, and I think I've heard you described it as almost like a punch to the gut. When you saw what
Sure.
was going down,
Yeah,
and much to your credit, you used it to motivate yourself. You won that match, and I think there was almost a darkness delay in that match, and it carried over to the next day, and
that's
you
right.
kind of had some time to reflect on what was going on, and
Mhm.
really really motivated you to go on and do some great things. So
That's
this
right, Chris.
is for an 18-year-old. I think it's fantastic.
It was what it was. I mean, it's certainly a memory, and the fact that it's carried this far, that you're aware of it, kind of speaks to it.
Yeah, I just think, for kids, for anybody who's played sports, you just kind of look back and say, what were some of the things that really motivated you in life? And I mean, that to me is a great story, right? I mean, that's something out of a movie right there, that you looked up and you're like, oh my gosh, and just fired you up. So I kind of love that story, but I fully understand as you get older, you understand, from more of a business perspective. But
Yeah.
yeah, I think, for him to have been in a neutral position probably would have made a little bit more sense. But
Yeah.
good
Yeah.
for you.
Oh, thanks.
Jim, you became world number one in February of 92. I'm sure that was incredibly satisfying for you. Did it bring a feeling of comfort and confidence, or did it raise the pressure level to try and protect your position at the top of the game?
So it happened very young in my career. It was an amazing sense of accomplishment. It wasn't even a dream coming true because I never really dreamt that big. I didn't think that I was going to be good enough to be number one when I was growing up. So for me, it was surreal to be standing on top of the mountaintop. But my coaching team around me did a really great job of keeping me focused and grounded, and realizing that just because I was ranked number one didn't mean that I didn't have things to improve. And that was really good to hear, to keep me focused. All right, there's still work to be done. We've got things to accomplish. Let's keep going forward, keep moving. You don't stop just because you're sitting on top of the mountain for the moment. There's still a lot of people climbing, trying to knock you down. So you gotta keep getting better. And that was our focus and our intent. And I did get better.
Yeah, that happened quickly, and as you said, kind of took you by surprise. But I think at that point, all of a sudden you say, "Hey, I'm the best. At least I'm ranked as the best player in the world." I mean, did that really give you some confidence? Like,
Oh
yeah,
yeah.
I think I am the best player in the world, or did it just take
Yeah.
a while for all that to kind of settle in?
Well, I think winning big tournaments gives you that belief and confidence that you can keep winning good tournaments. And the ranking is a byproduct of your results on the court. So if you just keep focused on what do I need to do to play my best today to beat the I play my best today, and hope that's enough to beat the guys on the other side of the net. And if they have a better day, they're always. You look at the history of tennis. You look at someone like Martina Navratilova. She had Chris Everett there to remind her that she wasn't foolproof. And Roger Federer had Nadal and Djokovic. And you've got all these in tennis. At least it's very hard to be a completely dominant player for a long period of time because the other players try and find your weaknesses, and that certainly happened in my era. I grew up with Andre. I grew up with Michael Chang, who was the first of our generation to win a major, and then Pete Sampras, who won very early, but it still took him a few years to settle into it. And then once he did, became the dominant force in our time that was tough to get past for all of us. So, all of us sort of were chasing the same things, but chasing our version of perfection. And I think we all kind of got where we should have. We all did find our perfection.
Yeah, I get you. Um, Jim, you won your first major in 1991 in Paris.
Hmm.
And I remember this, I love this. And a few months later, found yourself directly in the path of legend Jimmy Connors, who was in the midst of an amazing run to the semis at the US Open at age 39. And of course, Jimmy had the full support of the stadium fans throughout his run there. What was that match like for you to be a young, upcoming American star and to suddenly have very few people rooting for you at the US Open?
Yeah, it was harrowing. So the stadium, the main stadium then was Louis Armstrong Stadium, which seated 20,000 people, and there were eight people cheering for me, and they were all in my players box, which is understandable, and I
I'm
got it.
sure, yeah.
I like it didn't make me mad at all. I totally understood what was happening. You couldn't help but be swept up in Jimmy mania over those 2 weeks because it was a front page story, not a sports page story. It was a front page story. That's how big it was.
Yeah.
So I knew I was walking into the Lions' Den when I went to play Jimmy, and it certainly felt that way. It was the most harrowing walk to center court that I'd had, and probably would have in my career, because the intensity of the fans for Jimmy, it was palpable. You could feel it. It really did feel like a boxing contest was about to take place. But I was lucky enough to get a good start and kind of suppress the crowd's energy early on, and able and Jimmy was tired. He'd played so many long matches that his body just wasn't as fresh as mine. So I had an advantage there. But I mean, that will forever be Jimmy Connors' tournament, even though Stefan Edberg was the one who lifted the trophy in the final. He beat me the next day. Um,
Yeah.
no one outside of the real core tennis fans remembers Edberg winning that title. They remember Connors mania sweeping the tournament.
Yeah, and I mean, that was still, relatively early in your career. you probably were a Connors fan growing up, right? I mean, he was
Yeah,
a very
I was.
likable player. You probably had to reach pretty deep, right? I mean, that was something that you had not experienced before. I mean, it was intimidating, as you said, but I mean, what do you have to say to yourself mentally, to really get going? I know you wanted to get out and get off to a good start and try and
Yeah.
take the crowd out of it, which was, a very, very smart thing. But I mean, you really probably had to reach pretty deep there to get yourself ready to go in that match.
Yeah, I would think of my mentality was like a racehorse with blinders on, right? I wasn't looking up at the crowd. I didn't want to give any energy to that. I wanted to stay focused on me and Jimmy and strategy. And what did I want to do? I wanted to be a bully on the ground stroke rallies. I wanted to try and make it physical and dominate him and not let him get to the net where he was, very adept. And if I could do that, and I figured over best of 5 sets, it would work out in my favor. But I knew I had to deliver point in and point out against his intensity, which was, at that stage, the most intensity point in point out that men's tennis had probably ever seen. Rafa Nadal maybe was matching Jimmy, or maybe even a little bit more intense than that. But I needed it to kind of stand up to his energy and try and take the crowds out, realizing my racket was actually like a mute button. If I did the right things, I could mute the crowd with my racket, but I needed not to lose sight of what was happening in real time and not think about the big picture. Don't think about what it means. Don't think about Jimmy's run. Don't think about the crowd. Think about what you can control, which I'm sure, a lot of the athletes that you've talked to for this project will probably have said that to you or relate to that, because you got to stay really myopic in the moment. Otherwise, you can get lost.
Yeah, yeah. Um, I have such a distinct memory of that when Jimmy made that run, and I'm almost positive it wasn't your match, but it'd be interesting if you saw this, remember this. So I remember Connors was playing great, and maybe it was the match before yours, and the crowd was going crazy, and he went to get a ball, and he literally went tumbling into the second or third row in the stadium there. And I mean, there was a hush over the stadium. You didn't know he went in there hard. You didn't know if he was going to be hurt, and you probably would waited about 3 to 5 seconds, and all of a sudden Jimmy's head popped up, kind of a little smile. And next thing you know, he had one of the fans' cups of beer in his hand, and he took a sip. I mean,
Yeah.
obviously you remember that. That was one of the coolest things I've ever seen. I mean,
Yeah.
the
I,
place just exploded. It was
oh yeah.
amazing.
Yeah, Jimmy had everyone in the palm of his hand there. It was really incredible. His buddy Vitas Gerulaitis was doing the broadcasting at that point for the U.S. Open. So at times Jimmy would talk to Vitas through the court microphones at the back of the court. So it was a wild ride, and it was really I'm grateful to have been a small part in his ride.
Yeah, my dad was. He used to play a lot of tennis, and he was good. He'd take us out there every year. We usually go for like the semis, that final weekend. I mean, it
Mm.
was just a great environment out there, and I know it's changed a lot, even with the bigger stadiums and everything. But just a great event they hold out there every year.
Yeah, it's really turned into a full event now where they have great food. They have the grounds have improved a lot. It's got a real energy to it now. It's more of like a festival energy as much of it as a tennis tournament. They've done an amazing job with that property.
Yeah, no, it is. It's wonderful. Jim, the Grand Slam drought for American men has been well documented since Andy Roddick last won the U.S. Open in 2003, and it's somewhat understandable given the dominance of Djokovic, Federer, and Nadal. I think 66 majors amongst the three of them. I know that you've spent some time in recent years speaking with some of the upcoming U.S. players. Can you tell us what message or advice you've conveyed to them?
Sure. My message to all the young players that come up is to just keep chasing your best version of yourself, right? Don't leave any stone unturned. Make sure that when you put your head on the pillow at night, that you've done what needed to be done that day to get better. And and part of that message also is rest, right? Because sometimes players can overtrain and overdo things. So make sure that you're scheduling yourself for success as well. But by and large, look, just because we have an American passport doesn't mean we're granted a right to win these tournaments. We have to earn that right, and the best will rise to the top. So for me, the message is simply be the best that you can be, find out how great that is, and don't be afraid to fail. And we're going to get one. we're close. Taylor Fritz was there last year in the final,
Mm.
and we just have to keep knocking on the door, and eventually we'll get in.
Yeah, yeah. I've got to ask you about, the dominance of the big three. I mean, just incredible, right? I mean, such a level of dominance. They pushed each other. They really, no one could establish an advantage over the other than maybe Nadal at the French on clay, but they continued to push each other. They continued to beat each other. I mean, the only thing I could think of is it's almost like you had Jack and Tiger, playing against each other in their prime, and
Right.
they each were winning. I mean, I can't imagine we'll ever see anything like that in sports again. Just incredible.
It's something that is still mind-boggling. Djokovic is still active. He's chasing his 25th major, and I think he's very, very capable of getting it. We'll see if he's able to. But Federer, comes in at a time after Sampras had just broken the record and gotten to 14 majors, and we thought, oh my God, that's going to last a while.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, Roger takes the baton from Pete, and next thing you know, he's off and running. And Nadal joins the fray, and then Djokovic elbows his way into the conversation. And don't forget about Andy Murray, who was very much he won three, but in other eras probably would have won 7 or 8, which is what players like McEnroe and Connors and Agassi won. He was that good. He was just born at the wrong time, like so many were in this era. So it was astounding to watch the dominance and consistency and longevity that we've seen from them, because we didn't have anything to really compare it to in the open era, right? In the pre-open era, before men's tennis went open and women's tennis went open, you would have players like Ken Rosewall that made great runs into finals of majors late in their 30s. But since then, in the open era, Jimmy Connor's run that we've already talked about, where he turned 39 during that tournament, was the latest age that we'd seen a player make real impact at a major. And these guys were not just having impacts at majors at those ages; they were winning them, and it was really incredible to watch how they pushed each other, and they all became better players. And it's kind of frightening to think about what would have happened if they'd played at separate eras. Would Federer have won 35 majors? Maybe. To think about
Yeah.
how many that he lost to those guys.
Right. Yeah. Just
Basically,
I
he
was
only
just
got
thinking.
pretty much the only people that beat him were those guys for 15 years in a major.
Yeah, and I think what kind of sticks out with me is, I don't think for the most part they ever got a mental edge over one over the other. They just kind of kept coming back and going at each other. That to me was pretty amazing, that they just kind of kept, fighting each other and beating each other. And I'm sure they were each raising the bar as to how much they were practicing and training, but just an incredible period, not only in tennis, but in all of sports, without a doubt.
Yeah, look, I'd like to think that that's not going to happen again, but you just never know. No one thought that anyone was going to get past Pete for a while anyway, so you don't know. We've got another crop of really great young players playing now, with Carlos Alcaraz already 4 majors at 21 years old. We have Yannick Sinner with 3, and then we've got a couple of young players popping up that are teenagers right now. And there's a Brazilian kid named João Fonseca who looks amazing. And this kid who just won the Miami Open is 19, Jakub Mensik, who beat Djokovic in the finals there. So there's always new players coming, and it's a thrill ride to watch them. It happens in every sport. There's new players coming out of college in basketball and football and baseball and whatnot. And in golf, there's a new crop of kids getting their tour cards every year. So it's really fun to watch the renewal and watch these new stars come up and emerge.
Yeah, it is. And I know you feel pretty good about the U.S. players today, but I guess, before the big three came in and dominated, I'd say maybe U.S. had been somewhat dominant up until that point in men's tennis, somewhat.
Yep.
With so much global interest and talent, are the days of U.S. dominance pretty much over with in men's tennis?
I mean, I would say that dominance at the top, we could see another couple. We could get a generation of players like one that I was lucky enough to be involved in, where you get 3 or 4 players winning majors. That's certainly possible, but the game is deeper globally than it was. The information that advantage that America used to have in the coaching department, that's been democratized. There are tennis academies all over the world now, not just in Florida where they once were. So I think, as long as tennis remains a high impact sport with high earnings potential, you'll have people chasing that globally. And we're going to see the emergence of more Chinese players and more Indian players where they have huge population centers, and they have also a government interest in kind of talent ID, and then helping those players with national coaching. So I don't know that we're going to be what we were in the 70s when pro tennis first started. It was largely dominated by Americans and the Grand Slam nations, and we might have had 35, 40 of the top 100 players. I don't think we're going back there, but in the women's game, I think we have 19 of the top 100 right now, and I think that's possible to have that kind of depth. But dominance at the top, I think, will be harder to come by.
Yeah, we see it. It's almost like it is in golf, right? I mean, we have so many good players these days, but there's only four majors, right? I mean, it's tough, right? I mean, and as you said, if you happen to be in one of those eras where there's just one or two great players, it's tough. But four majors a year for tennis and golf, that's as competitive as you get, right?
Yeah, it's four opportunities at history. That's the way I look at it. Every year we crown four champions in both sports, in the ones that matter, the tournaments that matter the most. And that's where, you make your living at all the other tournaments. You make your name and history at those majors.
Yeah, yeah. Jim, I have always felt, I watch a lot of sports, that professional tennis events are the toughest grind in major sports. To win a Grand Slam event, you have seven matches, each anywhere from 3 to 5 sets. You have tiebreakers. In some cases, you have to overcome minor and/or serious injuries. You have crowd disturbances. You have weather delays. You have no team members. You have no caddy, no one on the court with you. Can you address just how tough it is mentally and physically to just reach the finals of a Grand Slam event?
It's hard. I mean, I don't want to shortchange all the other sports out there that have their challenges too. Tennis, we're not getting hit like football players or boxers, so it's but it is physical. And when you get injured, it happens on your side of the net. It's not because someone pushed you, but the game is so fast now. You have to move in a way that players in prior generations didn't have to, because like many sports with sticks, it's changed. Technology is made the game faster because the equipment is sturdier and lighter, so you can get more swing speed, which creates more pace on the ball for everyone. So it's difficult to go into any match if you're a professional tennis player without some ache or pain that you're managing. Yeah, that's why all these players now, they travel with their own personal physiotherapist. They can afford to do it, and they see that as a necessary investment to keep their engine running clean as best they can. But the mental side is also equally tough for what you laid out. You're out there by yourself. You have to hit every shot. You can't lay off any pressure. It's always going to be on you. Golf and tennis share that piece of the puzzle where you can't call timeout and have someone else take the last shot. It's always going to be you. And that comes with its exhilaration and opportunity, but also comes with the darkness of defeat sometimes, when you'll sit in your room and you'll ponder the missed shots that cost you that opportunity, and it's all on you. So you get all the highs and you get all the lows, and they're pretty amplified when you get to that major level, especially when you're playing for history. And we see how much that impacts people. So that's also why sports psychologists are so prolific these days, because players like needing physiotherapists to manage their body. They need sports psychologists to help them manage the emotional state, which it fluctuates all the time. Most people, I put it this way, when I get a chance to talk to people who are in business, I say, listen, you might have a big project that you as a team put together, and it might take years for you to understand whether the investments that you made, both financial and emotional and intellectual, get a payout or not. And in tennis, you are constantly, working on your game and your body and all that stuff. But you get a report card every day at a tournament, and it's binary. You win or you lose, and your feelings will go with that. You learn to manage them as you mature as a player and not get too high or too low. But it's still a report card that everyone can see. And that is, sports is different in a way to business from that standpoint, because the business report card, yes, there's a stock market that gives you a daily update, but when you're long-term investment projects, they take time to pan out. So you don't really get that immediate knowledge of whether you were good or bad. So that's something you got to figure out and how to survive as an athlete.
Yeah, especially in tennis, the mental side. I mean, you could go out and play a perfect set, right? And you lose in a tiebreaker, right? You could go out and you could play a second grade set and you lose in a tiebreaker,
Mhm.
so something now in your head has to say, hey, I'm not out of this match. I'm playing great. I can still do it. And it is pretty amazing in tennis, some of the comebacks you see when guys are down 2 sets. It goes to show mentally how tough they are. I mean,
Mm.
you probably grew up in a time where there weren't a lot of sports psychologists, but I mean, I guess I don't know if it's from Nick Bollottieri or your parents tell you early, like, the not never quit mentality in tennis has to be so, so strong. And I'm sure you must develop that at a very young age.
Yeah, and I also think, Chris, that some of that is innate. Some people are just born with the ability to take pushback and then keep pushing and take the hits and keep on going. And I was one of those kids who, had a very strong drive early on and wasn't afraid to fail, which is a big asset in sports because you're going to fail in life because you're going to fail and you need to get back up and keep going. But I was really lucky also at Bollottieri's Academy. One of the very first sports psychologists, Dr. Jim Lair, was in residence. And I was a teenager able to go sign up for a 30-minute chat with Dr. Lair, who's still a very dear friend of mine, and go and get some processes to try and deal with the stress. So it was a time where that was seen as weakness and in effect to admit that you needed mental health. Now it's just part of the overall package of trying to be as good as you can be. And that's one thing that also I think a lot of people fall prey to what we can see as far as the grace and beauty of, let's say, someone like Roger Federer, the most beautiful male tennis player, from a performance standpoint we've ever seen. It's easy to fall in love with what you're seeing when you see an athlete that graceful. Think of like Wayne Gretzky or a Michael Jordan. Like we're in awe of how easy they make it look. And then you have another athlete like a Rafa Nadal come along who doesn't make it look easy. It looks like work, but his biggest talent isn't how he's hitting the ball. It's how he's approaching hitting the ball. It's what you can't see that's happening inside in his guts, in his heart, in his head. Those skills are equally valuable and important, but they're much harder to identify early on. And then if you can get lucky enough, like I did, to have someone like Dr. Lair help shape you at a young age, that gives you a little bit of framework to deal with some stressful situations that can help you go a long way.
Yeah, I'll just ask you one more on this because I don't think most people in sports could really identify, other than, golfers. But when things aren't going well and you're out there on center court, I mean, it's just you, right? I mean, I guess there's been some back and forth over the years as to whether or not you can communicate with coaches, and I guess these days you can. But I mean,
Mhm.
even with that, I mean, you're just sitting out there. There must be times where you have to just dig so far down to say, all
Yeah.
right, I can play better. I can do this. I'm not out of it. I mean, but no one will ever experience that feeling of just being out in a position like that. I mean, I guess you work your way into it and experience helps, but that is such a unique position to be in any sport.
It is, and what happens is the pathway that you take allows you to manage those moments because you just kind of take the steps to get there, right? You start in your junior career and you get used to playing high impact moments. You might be playing for a state championship or a regional championship or maybe even a national championship, and you know what it means. So it pressurizes the situation. So you become comfortable in uncomfortable situations. And that's really the key for success is you've got to normalize these abnormal scenarios. You've got to you get used to walking onto center court and it starts to feel like you've always been there. And it's not unusual to have all these cameras on you and to have all these people watching and cheering or cheering against you. It just becomes your office and you just go to work. So you have to, if you took someone who was an amateur player and threw them onto center court of the US Open at a night match, they would freak out. They wouldn't have the systems in place. But these players, including myself, many years ago, develop systems to deal with that stress. And I think that's why we see, and then you see this in golf too. You see the rituals of the players, right? The things that they do before they hit the shot in golf, the things that they do before they serve or receive serve in tennis. Those are things that made me feel comfortable in uncomfortable places. It made me feel like I was home when I was very much away.
Yeah, I love it. Thanks, Jim. You won the Australian Open in '93, your fourth Grand Slam victory. I'm sure no one would have believed at that point that it would be your final major victory. You went on to win another 13 ATP events. It was a tough competitive stretch with your peers, as you mentioned, Pete Sampras and Andre Agassi compiling 22 Grand Slams collectively over their careers. What was it like for you from '93 until you retired in 2000? A lot of frustration or overall acceptance of an excellent career as you continued to win
Both.
ATP events and wound
Yeah.
up with 23 career wins?
Yeah, look, I think both. I think, certainly what happened, the reality is that Sampras really found his next level. And then that suppressed a lot of not only my, success, but everyone else's as he started to hoover up all these majors. And Andre found another gear in his career and started to win more majors. And I would be close to winning others, but not quite there. But I think overall, I kept, again, we circle back to the beginning of our discussion where I had these coaches focusing me on trying to get better. I maintained that drive. I went to work every day, trying to get better, trying to do everything I could to get another major, get another big title. And sometimes it works out and sometimes it doesn't. But when I look back on everything, it's with immense gratitude that I was able to be on tour for as long as I was. And to have the success I had still boggles the mind for me because it was, again, not something that I felt destined to have. I was very much fortunate that I was able to work my way into those positions and take advantage of some of the opportunities I had.
Yeah, yeah. You touched on a little bit before, and I know you did some training early on and you played some doubles with Pete Sampras, who you must have known him pretty well. Pete retired in 2003 at age 31. At that time, the men's all-time Grand Slam leader with, I think, 14.
That's right.
So given the extended careers of the big three, do you think Pete may have pushed on had the Grand Slam bar been set higher at that point?
That's a good question. Only Pete knows the answer to that. I do know Pete well and was there, as a junior alongside him and obviously in the locker room with him his entire career. And I know Pete was really mentally fatigued at the end of his career, as was I. It was a grind, and it's a good grind, but it's a grind with the never-ending calendar of tennis events. And it's hard to know if Pete would have been able to extend his career the way that those guys did. But what I will say is that having watched the way that Federer in particular set the bar for how to schedule for longevity, I think if Pete would have scheduled the way that Federer did, where Federer would take gaps in the season and take a month off and just decompress and then come back ready to go, we didn't do that. Lendl didn't do that. McEnroe didn't do that. Connors didn't do that. We all pushed and pushed and pushed as hard as we could. And eventually, either your body hits a breaking point or your mind hits a breaking point, but there's a breaking point. And Federer figured out a hack, which is that even though I'm required to play these tournaments, I'm not going to. And they'll just have to deal with my absence because I want to have a long run here. And he did. And I think that's what Nadal and then Djokovic, learned to do as well, is to manage their careers for longevity in a way that prior generations didn't.
Yeah, and I mean, I guess obviously those guys had they were pushing each other. They were going for records. Do you think the younger generation now looks at that and says, hey, if I can manage my scheduling, which we know is very controversial right now anyway, but do you think that the current generation and players to come say, hey, I think, I can do this into my mid 30s, possibly late 30s? I mean, do you think that's kind of the feeling after what those three did?
I do. I think everyone looks at that as now the norm and the expectation if you're a great player is to have an extended career like that. And certainly the management teams around these players, they've seen that and they want that for their players because that's more earnings opportunities for them as well. So everyone I think is incentivized to try and have these well thought out, well managed careers where you don't chase the low hanging fruit. You go for the long play, not the short play. So I think that is where we're probably headed on the go forward.
Yeah, yeah. Jim, so much has happened in the world of overall world of sports over the last 10 years, which has provided a lot more transparency for all parties. It's been reported that tennis players receive only about 25% of revenues. The PTPA, the Players Association, says it's even less. Today, in most major US sports, the players are receiving about or close to 50% of revenues. I know that you've done very well financially overall, thanks to 14 million in career earnings. You've had endorsements, you have your current business. Is it bothersome at all, though, for you to think that your winnings could have been, possibly should have been, 25 million or more, given a more equitable distribution of revenues?
Well, that's a layered question. It's a really good one, Chris. It's complex, right? Um, First of all, when I look at my career, I again gratitude. I'm grateful to have basically chased a yellow ball around the world, which is a game, something that I love. And if I'd grown up in the amateur era where there was no money available, I still would have wanted to do it. I still would have wanted to go to Wimbledon and stay in housing with one of the members to save money and try and win the biggest tennis tournaments in the world. So the fact that I was able to make a really nice living doing it, more than a really nice living, to be honest, I feel grateful, and I am excited for the opportunities that the generation playing now has because of the work that Billie Jean King and Arthur Ashe and Stan Smith did to create, and Rod Laver and all these greats that set the table for open tennis and professional tennis, and it's just it continued to make more money for everybody, and that's certainly the state of the game right now. Is players, tournaments, they're making more money than anyone ever has in the sport, and that's wonderful, and we like that. I also understand that the desire for the players to get more, obviously, compared to how you laid out some of the other leagues that have player unions that are able to negotiate collective bargaining agreements and get a little bit more revenue. Certainly, I think the players would appreciate getting paid more to do the same. Who wouldn't? We saw that in golf when the Saudis came in and said, we're going to pay you more money to do the same thing, or maybe even a little bit less. There were a lot of players that raised their hand and said, sure, that sounds good. And then the PGA Tour had to swing into action and raise their purses to counteract that. So that's been a net positive for the players. It's been a net negative for the fans because there's been this separation and we haven't been able to watch the best golfers compete at the same places all too often. Hopefully that'll change. In tennis, we're certainly in flux right now with there's a lot of friction right now between the PTPA, which is ostensibly it's trying to be a player representation group. It's not effectively representing all the players. There are some of them that are very into it. There are others that are not involved at all. So they don't have the 100% of the top 100, which is what you really need to be an effective bargainer. They don't have the leverage that they'd like to have. Maybe they will. But I do think that it'll stir the pot enough that some of the other tournaments that maybe aren't as transparent will probably be a little more generous. And maybe that percentage of revenue, even if it's a percentage of net revenue, that will increase for the playing group. Maybe better pensions, which has been happening, that would be helpful too. So there's a lot to it. The business of sport is highly complicated. I mean, just look at what NIL is doing to college sports. There's a lot of opportunity for revenue, but it also causes a lot of dysfunction at the same time.
Yeah, we've had this explosion of sports, right? And the money that it's attracted. And, here you had tennis and golf where you basically had independent contractors.
Mhm.
And especially in golf, golf was becoming this huge business, which was basically controlled by this little, I would say little, but this not for profit company, which had 100% control. And, something was going to have to give, right? Because there was just so much money going into sports. And, from my perspective, or a lot of people's perspective, it kind of gave in a bad way where, as you said, we don't get to see the best players play against each other anymore. And, tennis, I guess the same is following up on that, where you've not had a union, you're now starting to get a union. And I guess, as you said, you're not getting full buy-in on that. But the world has changed. And, here we are in tennis. And, we'll have to see what happens. I mean, I'll just ask you about the Premier Series. There's been a back and forth the last few years amongst the many governing bodies to possibly form a Premier Series of approximately 14 events, including the 4 Grand Slam events for the top 100 players or so. However, there have been no agreements to date, and I get the feeling that they're not really close. Do you have an opinion as to whether this can be accomplished or will be
Uh,
accomplished?
yeah. So yes, golf and tennis are remarkably similar as far as power structures, right? In golf, you have the four majors that are owned by four different entities, right? You have the PGA of America, the USGA, you have the British Open and Augusta, clearly, separate. In tennis, the four majors are four different businesses. Then you have the PGA Tour, which is effectively the ATP and the ATP Tour and the LPGA, which is the WTA. So you have these six power structures in tennis effectively. You have the ITF, which is, some team competitions. That's a lower level power these days comparatively. So how do you get everyone in the room, to decide how to divvy up a NewCo, right? We're going to make a NewCo. We're going to have 6 or 7 people come in. And everyone's going to contribute what they have. How do you divvy up the shares? I think it's very difficult to get that type of buy-in for these entities who operate independently, who are all making a tremendous amount of money. Like I read and hear that, tennis is being accused of being broken. Tennis may be messed up structurally, but it's not broken because it's never made more money for everyone involved. So it's very difficult in ways, even though there's probably more revenue available collectively, if you can bargain with television networks and sponsors and say, if you want to be Roger Goodell, you want to buy into tennis, you've got to come through me, right? We don't have that singular voice, but neither does golf. And golf keeps going on making a ton of money as well. Tennis will continue to keep making great money. Whether they'll use their leverage collectively, I don't know the answer to it. I think it's very difficult to get everyone to agree to do that. But if there's a will, of course, there's a way. I just think it's very hard to see that happening in the near term. The structural change that everyone agrees needs to take place is how do we make the season a little bit shorter? Again, takes a big pile of money. It's complicated. I could do a 2-hour show with you about that, and it's going to be hard for even to get a week or two back. It takes a lot of money and a lot of will and a lot of negotiating to buy people out. So it's hard. Change comes hard. And the last thing I'll give you on this is that think of tennis as like a little village that started, 100 years ago, more than that. And, people bought the real estate in town, and then the town just started growing and more people bought land and built houses. But the streets didn't make sense, and the plumbing and all the electricity, it's all jumbled because it wasn't master planned. That's what happened in tennis. It started small, it sprouted globally. To put structure to it, to make it a master plan community, you need to basically level most everything and start from scratch. And that's what the majors were trying to do with their Premier Tour. But again, if they can't agree with internally how to divvy it all up, how are you going to actually execute externally? That's a problem I think they're running into.
Right, right. Okay. So let me take that to one step further. So the ATP and the WTA have both formed partnerships with the Saudi Public Investment Fund, or PIF, which we're very familiar with from the world of golf.
Yeah.
I would think that is very meaningful and could put a lot of pressure on the Grand Slam leaders, given what's transpired in golf, where we now have the PGA Tour and to some degree a competing Saudi-backed Live Tour.
Yeah.
Does the presence of the deep-pocketed Saudi PIF somewhat compromise the leverage of the Grand Slam leaders?
Well, it could. I wasn't in the room when those deals are done. And, there's talk that they're going to announce soon that the Saudis are going to be given a high level tournament, that will come on like an equivalent of a Miami or an Indian Wells, these Masters 1000 events, that they'll have one of those, which is more akin to them having a Formula One race, one of the 20 races or so that F1 has. It's more like that. They're in the room. They're a big part of it, but they're not taking it over the way that Live Golf did. And I think that certainly there was a power struggle within tennis to get to the Saudis first, and when they saw what happened in golf, and to go to them with an olive branch and say, be a part of what we're doing as opposed to being outside. And here's one thing that is undeniably true is that even if they came in, they could blow tennis up very easily. The Saudis could blow tennis up the way that they pretty put a big hole in golf if they went to the top 20 men and women and offered them outsized money to be a part of whatever they're doing. So independent contractors can go wherever they want. Now, they would lose the opportunity to be considered historical figures in tennis if that excluded them from playing the majors. So that's the leverage the majors have, is that that's where people make their name. That's where history lives. You can win all the Miamis in the world. That's not going to get you on the front page of the New York Times obituary when it's all said and done, the way that Roger Federer or Chris Everett or Martina Navratilova will be when their time is gone. So what are you willing to give up? And that's the question that will be posed if that were the case. I don't think we're going to get there.
Yeah, I don't either. And it's funny, I was going to ask you that because I would call that maybe the worst case or, most extreme case scenario where, they did exactly that, right? They said, hey, we're going to form this new league, maybe with the ATP and WTA. We're going to pay you a boatload of money. But you're for the most part not going to be able to go back and play majors. We're going to play hardball with those guys, with the Grand Slam leaders. So
Yep.
they did it in golf. We saw a split, right? We saw probably more players obviously said no to the money but some big name players did say yes, and they said, you know what, I realize I may never get to play another major. Bryson DeChambeau, Brooks Koepka, Dustin Johnson, Smith from Australia, some really good players took that. So that would be the most extreme, but I don't know if the Saudis are willing to do that because I can't, you would have to think at this point the Live Tour has been a big money loser for them, right? I mean, they're hoping, I think, to get the traction, but they haven't got it. So listen, I hope it never comes down to that in the world of tennis, but I guess that would be the most extreme case probably right there.
Yeah, and I think what is going to happen is what's being reported is that they're going to be able to purchase a new event, and they'll be able to host all the best players in the world in Saudi sometime in the first quarter of the year, probably in February if it was done sensibly, because there's already a Middle East swing in Doha and Dubai for the players. So why not align it with that so you don't have to have other travel to get there? So that's most likely from all reports where we're going. And at that point, then it is more like Formula One, where they own a piece of top flight tennis, and all the best players come and play and give attention, which is what they're after. It would seem as they try and become more of a westernized society. It seems like they want to have all the things that a city like Paris has, or a city like New York has, or Miami. So I get it. I understand it, but I hope it ends up being in a place that it doesn't disrupt tennis. And it doesn't seem like it's going to in the way that it did golf.
Yeah, let's hope not. And it is funny because I don't. I follow tennis a ton growing up as a kid. I don't follow it as much as I used to, or as much as I follow golf. But until I started digging into this, as I told you in the last week, I didn't even really know things had gotten to this point. And like you said, the game itself is in a very good position, but I didn't realize there were all these kind of feuding and dueling parties behind the scenes. And the other thing that's kind of been interesting is the PTPA, the Players Association, where they've done something that I've never seen before, and I don't know what exactly their legal structures, but they've actually taken in outside money. So the players associations that we're used to, the big sports have, it's always just been this private entities for the benefit of the players. But we've got billionaire hedge fund manager Bill Ackman has invested in there. I know he's always been a big fan of tennis, and some others. So that's somewhat unique, and I don't know what their ultimate game plan is there, but just give me an idea. What do you think? What percentage of the top players have kind of jumped in with the PTPA? Do you have any idea?
No, they don't say. And what I also know to be true is there's not really a way to join the PTPA. They don't have a membership, if you will. They don't. Anyone who likes the PTA as a player and wants their support, they can go to them and say, hey, I'd like to get help from you guys with, you've got deals with airport lounges or hotels groups, but there's no membership fee. So there's really no way to know who's actually in there for even them, for even the PTPA. There's no way for them to know. And what's been a little bit interesting after they've, filed a very charged and high-powered lawsuit, in the last 10 days or so, what's really interesting is that you have a lot of the top players telling, when asked by media, that telling them that they didn't know anything about it, they weren't consulted. So it's a really intriguing lawsuit being filed on ostensibly on behalf of all the players, but a lot of the players are putting space between themselves and the lawsuit. And they may have their reasons for doing that. They may not, they may really want the lawsuit to go forward and support it, but they may want to be protecting relationships with people within tennis that are on the other side of that lawsuit. So it's complicated, but it's also at this stage very murky. What is clear is what you've outlined is that it's well funded by Bill Ackman. There may be others behind it, but Bill's certainly the most high profile person that has, claimed it. And uh, that will buy you a lot of legal firepower, and it has, and that has to be taken seriously by the people on the other side of this lawsuit.
Right, right. Well, hopefully it will, somehow iron itself out. There's a lot of money involved, but the game itself is in a good shape, and let's hope it doesn't get anywhere near what we've seen in golf. Speaking of golf, you have to tell me. I mean, you just had that powerhouse right-hand forearm. You're a really good golfer, but you play lefty. Just always ambidextrous. I mean, did you?
Yeah, confused, Chris. Very confused. I throw right-handed. I bat left-handed in baseball when I was a young kid. I bat, and I still would today. Always played golf lefty. So yeah, very confused. Most people use one side of their brain. I use neither.
I'm not sure about that. That's awesome. I love it though. Jim, thank you so much for joining us today on Questions for Cancer Research. I know that you do a lot of charitable work, including Courier's Kids, where you support inner city tennis programs. You've had an amazing playing career. You're doing so much currently in the world of sports and tennis. Congratulations on all. I wish you all the best. Great seeing you. Thank you so much.
Chris, it's great being with you, and congratulations on this project and continued success with it.